The 1980s has become a nostalgic treasure trove, even for people who were too young to remember them or weren't even born yet. There have been a slew of movies made in recent years that try to emulate the 1980s in one way or another, but nothing can quite capture the magic of the 80s like the original movies themselves. And you'd be hard pressed to find a year that represents the decade better than 1985. The 70s were a distant memory by this point, and the changes that were to come in the 90s were still a long way off. 1985 stands as a uniquely powerful time capsule, one which continues to have a lasting effect on pop culture to this day.
I am zero budget New York City guerrilla filmmaker Sean Weathers.
And I'm Canadian screenwriter and playwright Angus Combe. Join us as we celebrate the cinema of 1985, but be warned, this discussion may have us all wishing we had a time machine before we're done. The No Rules Film School is now in session. So 1985, there was a lot of significant things going on that year. Mikhail Gorbachev became the leader of the Soviet Union, and he ushered in that thing that they call glasnost, or openness, which was like a whole new beginning, kind of like an end to the Cold War in a way. So that was exciting. The Live Aid concerts were organized and performed. Bob Geldof and Midge Ure, they raised millions of dollars for famine relief in Ethiopia. And they had some of the biggest music acts of the time performing, including people like Paul McCartney, Mick Jagger, Elton John, David Bowie, Queen, Tina Turner, Madonna. The list goes on and on. It was quite a big cultural event. And for those who care about such things, the very first version of Microsoft Windows #1 was released, something I was unaware of until many years later. And also the wreck of the Titanic was actually found on the ocean floor in September of 1985. So that was kind of exciting, especially for Titanic aficionados. And on a negative side, the discovery of the hole in the ozone layer over Antarctica was also announced in 1985. So that was not as exciting as the Titanic. But yeah, anything you remember in particular from that year?
Climate change is a hoax. Climate change is a hoax. Yeah, so I mean, when was AIDS? I mean, the only thing anytime I think of the mid 80s, I think AIDS, crack, Reagan, Reaganomics, cocaine,
Greed,
Wall Street,
for lack of a better word,
yuppies,
is good.
I think Saturday morning cartoons, commercials, cereals with toys in the bottom of the boxes. Sometimes you buy a shitty cereal for like a 5-cent toy.
Oh yeah.
I think gumball machines in grocery stores where you just ask your mother for change so you can eat some like hard as a rock stale gumball just because it came out of some stupid machine. I think arcades and getting quarters to go to arcades. Not being able to afford to play the arcade. So when the demo was playing, you'd pretend you were playing.
Yeah.
I remember cutting school. The 80s very nostalgic for the good and bad. I remember Stray Dogs, Broken Glass Everywhere. It was even part of the song.
Broken glass everywhere.
The Message was a popular rap song. But yeah, I remember the streets were always just paved with like broken glass, dog shit, stray dogs. That was part of New York. You had graffiti all over the place. Graffiti was just everywhere. You still had token coins for the subway. Right now we have like Metro cards, and now you could just tap your smartphone to go into the Metro, but back then you needed tokens. Those are just some of the things that I think of when I think of like the 80s.
Yeah.
But this is New York, so I'm sure a lot of that, it doesn't even apply to you in Canada, eh?
Well, a lot of it sounds familiar, but I want to mention some of the songs that were really big, but I know that's dangerous territory because we could wind up singing all of them, and that will take up this entire podcast. So
when he says we guys, he means me. Anytime a song gets mentioned, I have to sing every bar of it terribly. I still want to sing the whole song of The Message, by the way.
Oh yeah, I can imagine. Yeah,
broken glass everywhere.
Well, I will just say that the number one song of 1985 was Careless Whisper by Wham.
Oh, wow.
That was number one.
The careless whisper of a good friend in your eyes and mine. Oh, yeah, that's a great one.
Yeah.
That's when, like,
So-
I think that was around the time when George Michael was going solo, right? That may have been like his
Well-
last big Wham song.
Well, oddly enough, the number three song of the year was Wake Me Up Before You Go Go by Wham.
Another Wham song, yeah.
So they were number one and number three of the year.
How did we not know
So-
he was gay? When he wake me up before we can go. How did we not know George Michael was gay? Looking back at it, he was not just gay, he was like flamboyantly Richard Simmons gay. And we chose to see him as a manly man in the 80s.
Yes. Well, right between the George Michael sandwich here, number two,
Oh,
was
was
Like
that
a
pun
Virgin.
intended? George
it
Michael
was.
sandwich.
It was.
Are you making fun of gay people?
No, not at all. Like a Virgin by Madonna. I was just.
Ah, you are making
you
fun
know.
of him. You're getting into the sexual double entendres. You're saying
Well,
someone sandwiched in between a George Michael sandwich would feel like a virgin? What would make a
that's
man feel like? What would you do to a man to make him feel like a virgin?
Well, that would be very complicated for me to have thought of. I was just thinking Madonna might have been disappointed with her sandwich.
That he was gay? Yeah.
George Michael. Yeah.
She was. She's like, all right, come on, fellas. Wait a minute. What are you doing to each other? I'm right here.
Yes. So-
You're right. It was a bad thing to bring up music. We haven't
Yes.
talked about a movie yet.
No. So moving along. There were a lot of good movies that year, a lot of memorable movies. So I'm just going to start with the top 10 grossing films of the year by worldwide gross, just to give a sample of the kind of things that people were watching and enjoying in 1985. And number one at the box office was Back to the Future, which I
Classic.
think
And
is
that
a
is
classic.
right behind you, right?
It is, yeah. I've got it there. That's I love that movie. I loved it back in the 80s, and I still love it today.
Yeah,
I
so
think it
that
works.
stars Michael J. Fox, who was on Family Ties, which was a huge TV show. He is one of the rare TV stars to go into movies. I think on a previous episode, I'm not sure if it was on the commentary that we do or the straight up podcast, we did get into George Clooney making that transition. Michael J.
Yes.
Fox is another top TV star, part of a number one show that was able to successfully transfer into being a legitimate big movie star. And he wasn't even the original
Yes.
person cast. I think they started shooting scenes with the original actor. I forget his name, but he had a decent career, but was never as big as Michael J. Fox.
Yeah. Michael J. Fox, definitely a star. And Canadian, too, by the way.
Oh, he's
there you go.
Canadian, eh?
He is, yes. Number two at the box office, Rambo, First Blood Part 2.
Oh, wow.
So this is like where, again, I mentioned this before, when you've got a hit movie, in order to have a successful series, you kind of want the second movie to be even better than the first. And I don't know if it is or not, but it certainly was a lot more violent, because I think that first movie, one of the weird things about it is that almost nobody gets killed. There's a lot of shooting, there's explosions, but everybody's okay, really. But this movie, they killed a lot of people.
I think it
First
was the
Blood Part
record,
2.
at least at the time, for the
I
most
think
people
so.
killed in a movie.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
and
think it was.
talk about like a 180, from no one dying to like the most people ever dying on screen. Very different movie. This was HGH steroid Stallone. I think the first one was like what you can look like with a natural physique. Here he was like straight up like a cartoon, a Saturday morning cartoon character with the muscles.
Yes, indeed. And I think the character was a little more realistic and sympathetic in a way. In the first movie, a guy who maybe had PTSD and was pushed and, kind of reacted to that. But in this movie, it really goes over the top. He's almost like a superhero killing people out there.
75
but-
people killed on screen in the movie.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was quite something. Something at the time. and certainly has led to a bunch more sequels. So I guess it worked.
I guess
And
so.
and you know, number 3, oddly enough, is Rocky 4. So once again, Stallone, and we've talked at length about Rocky 4 in at least a couple of
We've
videos.
covered Rocky 4 in a podcast form, and we also covered it in the commentary for the movie. So you can check out those videos for our thoughts on that.
Yes,
We don't have to go
exactly.
too much into it there. Let them watch that
No.
video for that.
No, but hard to believe that Stallone was in number 2 and 3, 1985. Number 4 was The Color Purple. Very different movie. And I must admit, I still have not seen that movie to this day. I never saw The Color Purple. Did you see The Color Purple?
I'm not a big fan of slave films just because of the way they're portrayed. It's hard to be honest with a slave film because it makes everyone look bad. It makes black people look bad. It makes white people look bad. It makes America look bad. There's no one that can look good in a portrayal of black people during the time of slavery. So I tend to stay away from those type of movies. I did see it because it was hard not to see it because it was just, as a kid, even in schools, they force you to see certain movies to discuss and talk about and things like that. And it's on TV, and you had very few channels that once it hit television, it's like, all right, you're going to watch the news instead, or you're going to watch the movie? So I did watch it. It's not bad. It made Whoopi Goldberg a star. I think Oprah was part of the production of it, and Spielberg was behind it. So you had a lot of heavy hitters behind it. It was okay. It's not my type of movie, but if it's your type of thing, it was well done, but it's just not my cup of tea.
Yeah. And like I said, I never saw it. And likewise, I never saw the number 5 movie either, Out of Africa. Did you see that one?
I believe that was what, Robert Redford and Meryl Streep?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
I've never seen it, but I'm aware of it. And it's not something that interests me because I was very young in 85. So
yeah,
even when it got to TV, like 87 or wherever it would have been on TV, and then maybe played on TV throughout the late 80s into the 90s, it's never something that would have caught my interest. It's not the subject matter or the actors or anything about it that I would want to watch, but I was well aware of it. And I haven't seen it, no interest in seeing it.
Yeah, I'm kind of in the same boat. It seemed like a boring movie for adults. I was not interested in that. Number 6 was Cocoon, another movie about old people, but this one I think a little more fun. Did you see Cocoon?
I saw parts of Cocoon. I've seen parts of it several times. Not something that interests me. Again, it's not something that interests me. I'll leave it at that.
Yeah. I'm not sure if I ever saw the whole movie either. So, again.
Yeah, I do know it's like old people going into some space pods type thing, and they come out and they're younger people. Yeah. I do know the premise of it, and it had an all-star cast. I think it might have been was Katharine Hepburn in that? I think. Ooh. I knew there were some like big time aging movie stars in the older roles, and some up and coming younger movie stars in the younger roles. I think the guy who was the star of those Police Academy films was in there as well. I forget his name.
Oh yes, Steve Guttenberg.
Yeah, he was like a big 80s star that.
Yeah, and Don Amici was one of the old guys who we just talked about in another video briefly.
Oh, he was the guy who was supposed to be Howard Hughes.
Howard Hughes, yeah. So this was a late period Don Amici performance. The 7th biggest movie of the year was a sequel. It was The Jewel of the Nile. So the sequel
is that the sequel to Romancing? You didn't even let me finish.
Yes.
Oh, give me a chance to guess. The sequel to Romancing the Stone, and I think it starred Michael Douglas and Sharon Stone. No, it wasn't Michael Douglas. It was Sharon Stone and this other 80s actor, kind of like Steve Guttenberg, who was like a leading man in the 80s, but he didn't quite make it past that, right? Some like blue-eyed, tall guy. Or was it Michael Douglas?
Yeah, it was Michael Douglas.
Oh, so I was right the first time.
Well, you were right about that, but you were wrong.
I was wrong about Sharon Stone. Hang on.
Yeah.
So if it wasn't Sharon Stone, it was that raspy-voiced woman. That was
Could be, could be.
Oh fuck! What the fuck is her name? I know who the actress is. She's very raspy voice, and she talks like this. And she was a hot model in the '80s. You know what I'm talking. Am I
Yeah.
right? Is it that? What's her name?
Well, it's Kathleen Turner.
Kathleen Turner.
Kathleen
Yes.
Turner. Is that?
Kathleen Turner.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I wouldn't have thought to describe her that way, but it made sense when you said it. So, yes, Kathleen Turner. So I really enjoyed *Romancing the Stone*. I don't think *Jewel in the Nile* was quite as good as that, but it was still a fun movie. What did you think of those films?
Not my thing. Some romance
Not your
novel type,
Yeah.
female fantasy. No, not my thing.
But they were kind of a post Raiders of the Lost Ark kind of an
I didn't
attempt
like
to do
Raiders of the
that.
Lost Ark.
Yeah.
So I'm not going
Really?
to like a knockoff of a movie I
Well,
didn't like in
okay.
the first place.
Fair enough then. And yeah,
I'm kind of harsh on these
number
movies. I'm
8.
usually kind of open to them.
You're harsh, but I'm sure you're going to love the next one. The next one is *Witness*. Do you remember *Witness*?
That is with Harrison Ford when he went
Yes.
undercover in Amish country to find some killer.
Yes,
Yeah.
that is
And
correct.
I forgot the actress that was playing the Amish woman, but she was in Top Gun as well.
Yes.
Yeah, her
Yep,
name's slipping my
that's-
mind. But yeah,
Kelly
I
Mc-
did.
Kelly McGillis.
Yes, Kelly McGillis. Yeah,
Yes.
so I didn't love that film when it came out, but I would say probably maybe in the '90s I kind of revisited it, and I liked
Yeah.
it more. I mean, I was probably around 5 or 6 when maybe 5 when it came out. So I mean, what am I doing watching a movie like that? So
Yeah.
no, in the '90s when it was on like VHS and on TV and stuff like that, that's probably when I watched it. So I didn't watch it in '85, but I eventually watched it, and it is a genuinely good movie, and I did like it. Yes.
Yeah, I do think it's a good movie. It isn't one that I know really well. I think I've seen it once, maybe twice, but I did think it was a good movie. It hasn't become a personal favorite, but maybe I need
It's
to
not a
revisit it
classic,
now.
but it was a good movie.
Yeah,
Every movie doesn't have to be a
Totally.
classic, but it was good.
no, that's true. The next one is, I believe it's here behind me here. It's The Goonies.
Hang on, why don't you ever give me? God damn it,
sorry.
man! What the hell
Okay,
is wrong
sorry.
with? Give me a chance. No, go ahead.
Yeah,
go ahead,
you're
go
right.
ahead, go ahead,
Yeah.
go
So it's right here behind me.
ahead.
Can you guess which one I'm referring to?
You already started saying it. Go ahead.
It's The Goonies. The Goonies. A lot of people pick The Goonies as one of their all-time classics, like a movie they love from the 80s. It wasn't quite that for me, but it is a movie I saw back then, and I did enjoy it. And I still think it's enjoyable today. I wouldn't put it up there with some of the other great movies of the 80s, but it's a fun movie. What did you think of The Goonies?
I don't know if I've ever seen it. It's never
no?
interested me. No. And my
Okay.
friends have seen. I have friends that have seen it as kids and loved it.
Yeah.
And think of it as a classic '80s movie. And
Yeah.
it would have been right in my age range, but it's not a movie that interests me. Even though I was a kid, I didn't really necessarily want to watch movies about kids.
Yeah.
I was never into like that, E.T. and stuff like that.
yeah.
I don't know why. I just because I was a kid, I didn't need representation on screen, and it wasn't something that was much of interest to me.
That's interesting. Well, I do think it is a fun movie. I think it holds up pretty well, and you might want to give it a shot at some point, just out of curiosity, because there are people who pick this as like one of their absolute favorites.
I
And,
don't argue. I have friends that
yeah.
love it. But I
Yeah.
will say this though. I love the '80s. I am shocked at how many of these movies I am like ambivalent towards. I don't know if there's a
Yeah.
movie you mentioned that I can say I love. I loved Rambo
Uh,
2 as a kid because Stallone looked like
yeah.
a superhero to me. But in hindsight, looking back on it, it's really bad.
Well, what about Rocky 4 though?
Yeah. But I like it ironically.
Yeah.
But I like it. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, those montage sequences, come on.
Yeah. I didn't
Um,
want to get into it because we talked about it on the other
No,
show
I
so
know.
much. Yeah.
But I love Back to the Future. I think that is a very good movie. I revisited that because I was working on a project with a guy who he's a big band musician who was wanting to create a musical with his music, and he hired me to help him out as a playwright, somebody who'd worked on musicals before, and it was a time travel story about going back in time to the big band era And so I watched all the time travel movies I could put my hands on, and I couldn't believe how good Back to the Future was. Like, it really struck me as really kind of a perfect film in a lot of ways. Every piece of it was just so well placed. It's just so perfectly designed. I think in some ways it's a masterpiece. And I know that might be a strange thing to say about a movie like Back to the Future, but I think it was extremely well done.
You know, it's ironic that you say well placed and well put together. Do you hate me? Are you trying to get revenge on me for some reason?
No.
Because you're going to make this edit hard for me when we talked about Back to the Future, and I could have paid some Back to the Future clips. You could have said that story then. Now you're going to make me come back to this part to now put more Back to the Future clips on screen because you want to talk about it twice. You could have said that story when the podcast started, when we first started with Back to the Future.
True enough. Yeah.
You ironically just said well placed. A well placed time for that story would have been when you brought up Back to the Future.
Yeah. Well, I guess I was just responding to your, there's nothing on the list that is, that you really love. And so I was saying, well, that would be the one for me. But
I see.
You're right, though. You're right.
See,
I should have.
Blaming the victim. That's what he's doing, guys. He's victim blaming.
Yeah, that's right. I love that. I love blaming victims. So there we go. To round out the top 10 of 1985, the final movie on the list, number 10, Spies Like Us, a John Landis movie starring Chevy Chase, Dan Aykroyd, and some other people. Yeah, I did not see this movie, I have to say. I had friends who saw this movie and thought it was funny. I didn't, for whatever reason, I did not see this one. I'm gathering you did not see it either.
I might have seen parts of it on television, but it's not something that I'm into.
But, to kind of wrap up on this, it's like, actually, the year 1985 was kind of considered to be an unsuccessful year for movies.
Listen, if you listen to the way I react to this as top 10, I don't like it. If these were the best 10 movies of the year, I would have been disappointed.
Well, I'm not sure they're the best, but they apparently had a record number of films released that year, but many of them failed at the box office, and ticket sales were down 17% overall. So it was not a good year. Executives tried to explain it as a lack of original ideas. I mean, who knows? Executives don't really know much, I don't think. But the only movies that really, really did well were Back to the Future and Rambo First Blood Part 2. Those were considered blockbusters, but everything else kind of not quite, didn't quite make it. So yeah, a bit of a surprisingly lackluster year for business anyway.
No, I'm saying this makes me more curious to know what were the Oscar nominations for Best Picture, to see if maybe, even if there weren't commercially great films, maybe there were critically great films, because I would hope that 1985 has more to offer than this.
Yes. Well, there definitely, I think there is a difference between the Oscar winners and...
Because none of these sound like Oscar bait type movies, with the exception of The Color Purple.
Yeah. So, this is where, if we're getting into Oscars, this is where I will quiz you.
Okay.
Like it's trivia. And so let's just see if you can figure out what movie won Best Picture. So I'm going to tell you the nominees here.
Okay.
So the nominees for Best Picture were Witness.
It's good.
Already mentioned.
Harrison Ford, yeah.
Prizzi's Honor.
Next.
Kiss of the Spider Woman.
Next.
The Color Purple.
Okay.
And Out of Africa. Those were the
I would say it's
nominees
between
for
Out
Best
of
Picture.
Africa and The Color Purple. I would have to think it would be The Color Purple.
Well, it's a reasonable assumption, but unfortunately,
What?
no. Out of Africa. Out of Africa won Best
Wow.
Picture.
Wow.
So there you go.
I knew it would be between those two. Those are
Yeah.
only two prestige type films there.
Yeah. Best Director, the nominees are John Huston for Prizzi's Honor, Akira Kurosawa for Ran, Peter Weir for Witness, Sidney Pollack for Out of Africa, and Hector Babenco for Kiss of the Spider-Woman.
I would say they'll probably go, in this case, with the best film and best director in Sidney Pollack for Out of Africa.
You're absolutely correct. Sidney Pollack won Best Director. Best Actor, we got a lot of good choices here. We got Jack Nicholson for Prizzi's Honor. We got John Voight for Runaway Train. We got William Hurt for Kiss of the Spider-Woman. Harrison Ford for Witness. And James Garner for Murphy's Romance.
Man, that I mean, I have to go with William Hurt. I know he's a prestige actor. He must have won one at some point in his career. And based on the competition, if he was going to win one, I would think it would have been this year.
You are absolutely correct. William Hurt for Kiss of the Spider-Woman.
Yes.
Very good. So Best Actress, let's just see here. Often I find the movie choices are a bit more obscure, but we'll see. Maybe these ones
Yeah, because in a lot of the bigger movies, women are like the damsel in distress, they're the love interests. They don't get a chance to really shine. So it's really the unconventional movies where you see the women getting the nominations and stuff. So
Totally. So the nominees are Anne Bancroft for Agnes of God, Geraldine Page for The Trip to Bountiful, Whoopi Goldberg for The Color Purple, Jessica Lange for Sweet Dreams, and Meryl Streep for Out of Africa.
I wish I knew if Whoopi Goldberg won an Oscar. I don't know the answer to that question. That's the only thing that's, throwing me off. But I would probably say Meryl Streep's been nominated like 1,000,000 fucking times. I know she's won like 3 or 4 of them. I don't know which movies she won them for. I'm going to guess that Out of Africa is going to make a sweep here with some of these nominations, because I remember hearing about that movie a lot. And I'm assuming I heard it a lot because the critics liked it. And I'm going to say Meryl Streep.
Well, that's a very logical choice, and I'm surprised to tell you that's not the case. They went more obscure here, and the winner is, or was, Geraldine Page for The Trip to Bountiful.
Wow.
I've
never heard of that movie, and I don't even know if I know who that actress is.
Yeah, I must say I don't remember that movie. Geraldine Page had a long career. I don't know her particularly well. Trip to Bountiful. It's a drama.
This is why people don't watch the Oscars, because they do shit like this.
Yeah. It was adapted from a play. It's interesting.
I'm sure maybe I've seen something she's in, but I just Googled her and I don't recognize her face at all, even from the older or younger pictures, honestly.
Yeah. Well, there you have it. Best Actress. So Best Supporting Actor. You feeling up for that?
Yeah, I'm just searching Geraldine Page to see if there's anything I recognize. Hondo. I think I've heard of Hondo. So it looks like she maybe was in some westerns. Interiors. Is that the
That's
what's his
Woody
name?
Allen.
Movie? Yeah.
Woody
I haven't
Allen,
seen it, but I've heard of Interiors. But no, I'm not familiar with Geraldine Page at all. All right, let me close this out so I'm not cheating. All right, go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. So Interiors, that's an interesting movie because it's his serious movie. It's not really a comedy. It's a very early serious movie. It's actually pretty good for what it is, but it's missing the laughs that you would expect. But moving along. Best Supporting Actor. The nominees are William Hickey for Prizzi's Honor, Robert Loggia.
That's Robert Loggia. R as in Robert Loggia. O as in, oh my God, it's Robert Loggia. B as in, by God, that's Robert Loggia. E as in, everybody loves Robert Loggia. R as in, Robert Loggia. T as in, Tim, look over there, it's Robert Loggia. Space. L as in, look, it's Robert Loggia.
Robert Loggia for Jagged Edge. Eric Roberts for Runaway Train.
There's
Don
no way
Amici.
Eric Roberts won an Oscar. There's no way Eric Roberts won an Oscar.
Don
Before
Amici.
his sister? Before his much more famous sister?
Yeah.
Julia Roberts? No. I'm going to go out on a limb and say Eric Roberts did not win this one. Good one.
Well, I don't want to spoil anything, but I'll tell you, you might be right. Don Amici for Cocoon. And
Hang on.
Klaus.
So hang on. So
Yes.
the next person you're going to mention is the last person.
Yes.
I'm going to go out on a limb before you even say who the last person is. I can't
Okay.
see any of these people winning an Oscar. So I'm going to go out on a wild limb and say the person you mentioned next is the winner. And who is he?
The person you are suggesting as the winner was Klaus Maria Brandauer, and it was for Out of Africa. So that's not a bad choice considering it's Out of Africa, but unfortunately, or maybe very fortunately for the winner,
It's Eric Roberts.
no, it's Don Amici for Cocoon. So a late in life Oscar win for Don Amici, who
Good
was
for Don
making
Amici.
movies back in the 30s and 40s, I believe. So Best Supporting Actress, this may be even more complicated than Best Actress. The nominees are Amy Madigan for Twice in a Lifetime, Meg Tilly for Agnes of God, Oprah Winfrey for The Color Purple.
There's no way. There's no way Oprah has an Oscar. Is there? ahead.
Angelica Houston for Pritzi's Honor, and Margaret Avery for The Color Purple. So there's two performances from The Color Purple competing with each other in this category.
Has Angelica Houston won an Oscar? I don't even know if John Huston won an Oscar, much less his daughter. I'm going out on a wild limb. Who was that last person, that last actress you mentioned?
Margaret Avery for The Color Purple.
I'm going to go either Margaret Avery or Angelica Houston. But in the past, anytime there are two nominations in the same category, they always tend to cancel each other out. So because of that logic, I'm going to go with Angelica Houston in Pritzi's Honor.
You are absolutely correct.
Yes.
Angelica Houston won Best Supporting Actress for Pritzi's Honor. Do we care about Best Screenplay or Best Screenplay based on other material?
Based on these movies you're mentioning to me, no.
Yeah.
No.
So, did the Academy Awards elevate 1985 at all?
No, they did not.
No.
They made me think even less of 85.
Well, I mean, we do know that the movie Ran, or Ran, however we pronounce that, Akira Kurosawa, that's considered to be a masterpiece. And
That is
I
one
did
of the rare Kurosawa movies I have not seen. And
Yeah.
of the Kurosawa movies I have not seen, that is the only one that's considered great. Every movie
Yeah.
that's his that's considered great I've seen. There are a few, because he's made a lot. There are a few like movies that are like okay or not so great I haven't seen. That's the only great movie he made that I haven't seen yet.
Yeah. Well, I did see it a long time ago, and I did think it was very good. And it's an adaptation of King Lear, the Shakespeare play. And it has a
He
line
has
of
adapted
dialogue.
Shakespeare a few times.
Yes. There's a line of dialogue in there that I've always remembered, after all these years. And it's something to the effect of, we are born crying, and when we've cried enough, we die. And I thought, never has there been a truer statement made than that.
I would have to think
So,
about that a little bit.
Yeah. But that's definitely a movie you should add to your list. I'm sure it's already on your list, in fact, and everyone should add to their list. So that is a good movie from 1985. And, as a horror fan, I have to say there are some good movies, some of which were not appreciated at the time, like Day of the Dead, the third movie in the George Romero series. it's sort of underappreciated. A lot of people don't like it compared to Dawn of the Dead. I actually really like it. I think it's a good movie, and I've watched it a lot. It's one of those movies I just thoroughly enjoy.
Is that the
Um,
one where the bully military guy gets his
yes,
guts ripped out? Yeah, I did like that
yes,
one. I like that one.
yeah. And Friday the 13th, A New Beginning, which is right behind me here, I think.
Let's see
You know,
it.
that right here,
Which Friday the 13th is that? Let me see the box.
that's A New Beginning. That's,
Dude, we're doing a visual medium. You can bring it closer. You don't have to point to it in the background. You can bring it to the foreground, dude.
yeah, well,
It's a
that's what I'm
visual
doing.
medium we're doing. Let me see the back. I forget which one that is. I can't remember them by name. What happened in that one?
Well, this is A New Beginning. So Jason was killed in part 4.
Jason's
So
killed in all of them.
this
Well,
is
go ahead.
this is a killer that is not Jason. It's somebody
Oh,
impersonating Jason.
got it, got it,
And
got it,
so
got it. Yeah. That's
at
the
the
one everyone
time,
hates because it's the one that, like, aside from the first one, doesn't have Jason in it. But I like
yeah,
that one.
I do too, but I will say that when it came out, I hated it as much as you hated the Ewoks. I hated this because I thought
You
it was
hated it that
stupid.
much?
Yeah, because I thought it was stupid because he was only a guy in a costume pretending to be Jason, but he had all the supernatural powers of Jason. He was indestructible, you know, and so I thought it was stupid, but I must say now I love it.
Because you realize all of it was stupid, not just the fact that he wasn't Jason. I don't know. I like a lot of these 80s movies, ironically. The Jason movies, or the Friday the 13th movies, Rocky 4. There are very few of these movies you've mentioned in this podcast that I genuinely like. I genuinely like The Witness, but I'm not a huge fan of it. Like, it would be lower on the list of my favorite Harrison Ford films. And I'm sure if I watch Goonies, I think it was okay. Who knows? I might love it, but it hasn't interested me. Some of these movies might be good, but they're just not my cup of tea. I guess I would say maybe the only movie that's genuinely, I guess, a great movie, even though it's not, again, not, up there with one of my favorites, is Back to the Future. While I'm not a huge fan of it, I can't deny it's a great movie and it made a huge impact on people. But aside from that, this has been like a meh year. I can see why it didn't do that well financially, and I can see why they had to stretch to pick a lot of these obscure films to nominate for Oscars because there wasn't a lot to pick from.
Yeah, well, it's certainly surprising that it isn't more exciting in a mainstream way anyway. I do think, again, there are some great horror films, the ones I mentioned, and a couple of others that I'm particularly fond of, like Fright Night, the vampire film, and The Reanimator, Stuart Gordon's, I think, brilliant film, and Return of the Living Dead, which was sort of like the
Mm.
unauthorized
You know
sequel
what? That
slash
might be my
spoof.
favorite film of the year.
Yeah, Return of the Living Dead, Dan O'Bannon. Yeah, the wonderful, wonderful film.
I laughed
Uh,
so hard when I watched Return of the Living Dead.
yeah,
I watch it with a group of friends, and some of those scenes were just so hilarious. And
yeah,
ironically, we're talking about Friday. We just talked about Friday the 13th, A New Beginning, right?
yeah.
So the what's the name of that character that was played by three different actors in three straight movies? Uh
Yeah, I
they
know
call
who
it the
you mean.
trilogy. The
Tommy.
Tommy
Yeah,
something trilogy.
yes. Tommy. I can't remember his
Tommy
last name.
Wiseau.
Yes.
But
Uh,
it's the trilogy of movies that feature that character played by three different actors. Corey Feldman, I think, played him
yes,
first, and then in this movie
yes.
another character plays him, and then in the following movie another character plays him to complete the trilogy. The person that plays him in the third movie is the star of Return of the Living Dead because they
Uh-huh.
bring some comedy to it. So
Yes,
yeah, yeah.
that's right. Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, you know, as I said, I hated Friday the 13th, A New Beginning at first, but over time I came to appreciate it. And it's the fact that it is different that kind of makes me like it now. And I love Return of the Living Dead, loved it from the first time I saw it. And likewise, Reanimator and Fright Night. Now, one other movie that we probably should have mentioned, which is not a horror film and is an iconic film from the 80s, came out in 1985. I'm surprised it didn't make the top 10 box office list, and that is The Breakfast Club.
That came out in 85?
Yeah,
I
The
love that
Breakfast Club.
movie.
Yeah, so I'm surprised it didn't make the top 10. It did make a lot of money.
Oh my
But,
God, that's such a great movie. John
yeah,
Hughes, I think is the director.
John Hughes.
Oh, he made so many great 80s movies and teen movies. Thank God he
Yes,
hasn't come out as like a pedophile. That would break my heart because he worked
yeah.
with a lot of young teenagers, um, especially with that Nickelodeon scandal going on now. And,
Oh,
obviously
yeah,
the other stuff with Bill Cosby and Art Kelly and Puff Daddy. And so it's
yeah,
good that nothing's come out with him because he worked with a lot of younger people. That was a theme of what he
yes.
did. So, but yeah, he made a lot of really great. So, as a kid, I didn't really want to. I didn't really necessarily want to not want to, but I wasn't drawn to movies that had people my age in it when I was very young. But I did like movies that had people slightly older than me. There was the excitement of like, oh my gosh, when I become a teenager, Even like I was a huge comic book collector, and the X-Men were considered like teenagers in the first
Mhm.
series of their comics. So I was a huge X-Men fan, and I was a even bigger fan of the Teen Titans,
Oh,
of
yeah,
teenage superheroes. So when collecting comic books, I love teenagers. When watching movies, I love watching movies about teenagers. Return of the Living Dead, Breakfast Club. Those are more movies in line with what I was when I was like 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years old.
yeah,
I wanted to see movies about teenagers because being a teenager was the ultimate thing. It's like, oh my God, it's so exciting and life is going to change. And
yeah,
yeah, so those will probably fit more into my sensibilities. Was movies with teenagers and those movies rather than the other movies we mentioned before.
yeah.
Um, so I'm looking at IMDb. Why are they only calling him Tommy? I think it's Tommy Jarvis, but
That
IMDb
sounds
only has
right.
Tommy. Was
I
that?
know. Yeah, I think that might be right. Tommy Jarvis.
Yeah, but why
Um,
does IMDb only have Tommy? But yeah, he did
yeah,
star in the Friday the 13th, the next following one after Return of the Living Dead. But I'm
yes,
like 99.9% sure it's Tommy Jarvis, but for some reason
yeah,
IMDb doesn't have it there. But yeah, that actor of the following year in 1986 would play Tommy. Um, Tom Matthews, but Tom
uh,
with an H, like
yes,
Thom Matthews. He
yes,
did play
yes.
Tommy Jarvis, but yeah, I'm pretty sure it's Tommy Jarvis. Why would IMDb not have that there?
I
They're
don't know.
supposed to be about all
That's
the
yeah, that's strange.
yeah.
But
But yeah, I just
yeah,
googled Tommy Jarvis. It's yeah, it was Tommy Jarvis was the character played by three
okay,
different people. The one that came out in '85 was the second incarnation, and
yes.
yeah, um,
And we actually had two Tommies in there because we saw the 12-year-old Tommy in a flashback or a dream or something, and then we saw the new adult Tommy in the rest of
mhm,
the film. So they
yeah,
kind of intersect there, young
yeah.
Tommy and old Tommy.
Well, I
But in
mean,
terms of
Corey Feldman would have been the biggest star in the movie, so
yeah, true
why not
enough.
show a
Yeah,
flashback of him? Because they had no
true
main
enough.
characters in that.
Yeah,
Um, and I think there was a black character that got killed in like a porta potty or a toilet in that movie you're talking about,
yeah,
the Friday the 13th, the New Beginning or whatever. He was
yes.
also, I believe, in Return of the Living Dead.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah, yeah,
You're making all these connections for me. I never noticed that. Well, maybe
yeah.
I did, but I didn't remember.
Yeah.
But yeah, I guess I'm overdue for a rewatch of Return of the Living
Yeah,
Dead. It's been a
I've
while.
seen those Friday the 13th movies so many times, and I've seen Return of the Living Dead so many times. It might be my favorite zombie movie. I may not
Yeah,
think it's the best. The best you may have to go with the classic um Night of the Living Dead. You could go with Shaun of the Dead with this just amazing comedy take on zombie movies. You could go further back like White Zombie and some of those black and white zombie movies.
yeah,
But Return of the Living Dead is right up there with one of my favorite zombie movies. So
yeah, totally, totally. So it sounds like we may have salvaged 1985 a little bit here. We've
with
got
the
a couple of
smaller
good
movies
movies.
though, like,
Yeah,
none of
yes.
the big stuff.
Although The Breakfast Club, I mean, it had a budget of $1 million, and it earned over $50 million at the box office. So even though that wasn't quite enough to make the top 10, I think profit-wise, that has to be one of the most profitable movies of the year.
Mhm.
And of course, famously, John Hughes, he made his first feature the year before, which was 16 Candles, which was a surprise hit. And he had wanted to do The Breakfast Club first, but they didn't trust him on it. They didn't think it was going to work. So after the success of 16 Candles, he did The Breakfast Club, and of course, he was right. It was huge. It was a cultural touchstone, I think, for a whole generation, and has continued on, I think, to be loved by many other people. And oddly or sadly, John Hughes, he wound up kind of walking away from his Hollywood career at some point, and nobody really knows why. He continued to write scripts, but he didn't direct anymore. And I think he lived in Chicago, and he kind of kept to himself. And there was a documentary made where some young people tried to get in touch with him and tried to find out why he walked away, but he never talked to them. And then he died. And he was only about 59, I think, when he died. So that's kind of the sad end to his story. And we don't know what happened. We don't know
Yeah,
why
I want to keep not knowing, because the
Yeah.
fear in my heart is that it had something to do with these young kids, man. I've always feared that for John Hughes, because
Yeah.
he was always working with kids, then he's quietly disappeared, and you heard a lot of kids in the 80s, especially Corey Haim and Corey Feldman, both talk about being abused. They made no indication it was him, but they did talk about it a lot. So, and there's always talks about predators a lot. And in no way am I
Yeah.
saying anyone implicated him or hinted that he was one. I'm just saying,
No.
because my heart has been broken so many times by, I love R. Kelly, I love Bill Cosby. I don't necessarily love Puff Daddy, but he was a big part of my childhood because his music was popular, even though I'm not
Yeah.
necessarily a fan of his. But he was part of the culture. And to see all these people get knocked time after time, even though I'm not a Harvey Weinstein fan at all, from what I heard, he was an asshole. He made some great movies. So
Yeah.
it's just tough to see all this stuff go on, like in front of your eyes, but behind your back, or like, hiding in plain sight type thing. But and with this Nickelodeon stuff now, and I don't know if you've seen some of the with this recent Puff Daddy stuff coming up, there have been some edits on Twitter, and I'm sure on other platforms too, maybe TikTok or wherever. They put together a compilation of Justin Bieber, and it is just so horrific. And this isn't behind the scenes stuff. This is like at award shows, on interviews, how all of these adults are sexually touching him. And he's saying,
Wow.
stop, don't do that. I'm uncomfortable. He's literally telling us on live television, but like you just feel like, how did I not notice that? But when you see this compilation of Justin Bieber telling these adult men and women to stop grabbing me, stop doing that, I'm uncomfortable. It's just like, Jesus, like, like we just turn a blind eye to all of that stuff.
Yeah.
So again, nothing's been accused of him, just with his
No.
mysterious disappearance, and with my heart being broken, and with everything going on in the world today. I hope he left for other reasons, than something bad. So
Yeah. I hear what you're saying, and I think the good news is that there hasn't been any stories coming out. Nobody has said anything, and I suspect it's probably more that Hollywood is a tough place to work. And there's probably a lot of mean people, and if you're not a certain type of person, it probably weighs on you, and you just don't want to be involved in that anymore. So you walk away, and you're willing to still write stuff, but you don't want to be there taking the abuse, or dealing with the people. I'm kind of guessing it's something like that, but we'll never really know for sure. And I guess we just have to have faith that there was nothing sinister in his life that caused it. And the films certainly hold up after all this time, and I think they are still good. They're still loved, and certainly this one is a classic, and probably one of the best films of 1985.
yeah, and like I said, I mean, I love movies about teenagers. When I was a preteen, and almost all of his movies came out when I was a preteen, so I was a huge fan of his. So
Yeah. So I guess that's probably about it for 1985.
Okay.
Unless you have anything more to say.
I have nothing more to say. You salvaged it by bringing up John Hughes and some of those horror movies, horror comedies. But for the top movies, the Oscar-winning movies, very underwhelming here. Hopefully,
Yeah.
the next year we cover on the next podcast, we'll contrast this in a better way.
Yeah, I think it can only get better, really, after this.
Don't say that. Don't jinx us, man. Do not jinx us. And with that said, for Angus Combe, this is Sean Weathers. Class dismissed.